Hey guys, it's Daniel with Sporadic Hobbits. Kyle and I get back into it in this one. Just wanted to say thanks for listening. How you doing, man? It's been a little while since we chatted.
Well, yeah, it's been about a month since the podcast. Thankfully, we've been able to talk a little bit since then.
Yeah, that's true.
But
I, yeah, all of our fans are in an uproar.
actually, my son has been very disappointed that Dad has not had a podcast. So my wife was
Uh,
happy to tell him that Dad will have a podcast soon,
Ish.
ish.
Does she understand that the bottleneck is me and not you?
I mean, that's not really fair because I could take time and actually edit it myself, in which case the bottleneck would be me, not you.
Sure,
So,
that's true. Yeah, well, I had kind of been thinking over the last month. It was just hard to get myself to start um, editing, and I was like, is this something I want to do anymore?
right.
Um, and so that kind of thought had been going through my head, and it just felt like, I don't know, you kind of, when you asked to do it again, I guess one of the questions that had come to my mind was like, if I never ask Kyle to do another podcast, will he ever ask to do another podcast? And
And your
so
question was answered.
my question eventually was answered. So yeah, eventually you said, "Hey, are we gonna do this again?" And so here we are. Um,
Well, and part of it
yeah.
came down to the text that you sent to me, which was on the podcast that Shane Parrish did with Nuriel, who initially wrote the book Hooked, and then more recently has come out with a book on indistraction. And not only have I gotten a lot out of it, and my wife has listened to, I think, about 2/3 of it at this point. Actually, I still need to send it to her so she can listen to the rest of it. Isaac, who's been on this podcast, and his wife have both listened to it. And my wife was talking to his wife about it because she comes over and makes dinner. There are three women who get together and make dinner at our house once a week and then bring it back to their families. And they were talking about it during that, and she was super excited about some of the things that she had pulled out of it. So that podcast you sent is making waves. And
Yeah.
Shane, thanks for interviewing Nur. And
Was there any particular? I don't know. Do you want to talk through? It's been a little while since I listened to it. I started, and I thought I would have time today, and um, didn't make enough time basically. Um, but do you want to, Kyle? Do you want to talk us through some of your understanding? I can give the broadest strokes, but
yeah, how about you start out with the broad strokes, and then I can fill in with some of the. I took some notes on it when I was listening through the second time. I didn't make it all the way through, so I don't have all the notes. The first time I listened to it was actually my parents have a sauna, and so I was trying out the sauna and listening to that at the same time. And that's actually a really cool way to listen to a podcast, because it's like you're just sitting in there and you aren't really doing anything else, but it's a
hmm
great time to just sort of focus on whatever it is you're listening to or sit with your own thoughts
yeah,
while still doing something that at least has some anecdotal health benefits.
yeah. Okay, so I want to ask a few questions about that, and then I'll get into the neuro. Yeah. How do you say it? Near y'all?
That sounds better than the way I was saying his name.
One, how did you listen to a podcast in there? Did you bring your phone in
Yeah.
and in 100 and whatever, 20 or 30 degrees?
Yeah.
Okay. So were you playing it? You weren't playing it on earbuds or anything. You were just playing the.
Yeah. I was just playing it on the speaker.
Okay. All right. And then two, is this a new thing that your parents have, or they've had it
My
for a long
dad
time?
got it probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
He listens to podcasts and stuff, but I think his most consistent usage of it is Sunday mornings before church. He'll listen to a John Piper sermon.
Hmm. Part of me would love to have a sauna. My wife's parents have one, and I've probably used it a total of like 3 times.
Hmm.
It just feels really weird to go over to their house and then like use their nice thing and you'll be alone.
Yeah.
So I haven't taken as much advantage of that.
This is the only time I've used it, and I was over at my parents' house because my wife had gone back to Vancouver for a bridal shower, and it was the weekend after my surgery, so I was still pretty careful about using my arm. They
Yeah.
they basically hosted their invalid son in their house, and then
Okay. Yeah, your shoulder healing up all right though?
yeah, it seems to be. I mean, the way the surgeon explained it to me, and I've kind of have gone over this on my blog. That it was actually kind of cool because going through surgery gave me some more stuff that I was excited to write about on my blog. And long story short is that it takes about 6 weeks for a bone to heal, so the fracture is just getting to the point where in another week and a half or so it'll be healed up. And then at 12 weeks, that's when the cartilage starts to reattach to the bone. So that those those time periods are kind of what determines different stages in the recovery process and rehab process. So 6 weeks is when I will start PT on mobility, and then 12 weeks is when I'll start PT for strengthening.
I'm glad you're doing all right. How long has it been?
It's been 4.5 weeks.
Okay. Cool.
The next blog post I want to write is about the knees over toes guy on YouTube, and I've been doing some of his leg exercise routines because they don't require any arms, at least
Mm.
at my ability. And I think it's been helpful, but I'm curious to keep doing it. I've only been doing it for about a week and a half, so
Yeah, well, as far as the Knowledge Project podcast, so I think the title of it is something along the lines of mastering a distraction.
yeah.
And one of the things that is pretty overarching is that you're not distracted by external stimulus, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy to blame things outside of yourself, whether that's technology or the food that's available or the people in our lives that make us busy or any number, projects around the house. It's like, there's so many different things that could have my attention. And I think the kind of hypothesis or answer to that question of why am I so distracted or what distracts me so much, it's basically that you're trying to cover up your feelings. And so when I don't feel like I can control myself because I want to keep checking Twitter or I want to eat something that I know I shouldn't or any number of things, it's because there's some kind of internal strife that you're not dealing with, which I have found to be true for me and a number of people in a men's group that I was involved with for a long time is that there's a certain clarity that the men there had after they had been there for a little while and were able to put into practice some of the things that were kind of core to the beliefs, and one of those was dealing with your emotions. And so anecdotally that fits pretty well. I'm pretty interested in reading that second book that near y'all wrote, and maybe the first one, I don't know. He kind of goes over that pretty much right at the beginning of the podcast, but from my recollection he spends a lot of time kind of expanding on that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that he stated very clearly and almost dogmatically was the idea that psychologically our behavior isn't driven by carrots and sticks. It's really driven by a desire to flee discomfort.
Do you agree with that?
Well, as you were describing your observations in the men's group, and as I was talking to my wife about it, and I was going, I'm really having trouble coming up with counterexamples to that.
So a counterexample is, Kyle, do you know anybody who's ever climbed a mountain?
Yeah, and I think that is actually that that you could construe that as a desire to flee discomfort.
Please explain.
Thinking back to when I climbed Mount Hood almost a year ago, that was a very uncomfortable experience. But
Mm-hmm.
as Ayal points out, it's about the balance of discomfort. It's about relative discomfort. And there was more discomfort in my mind that would come from having had the opportunity to climb Mount Hood and having not taken that opportunity than and having missed the opportunity to spend time with the people I got to climb Mount Hood with. There was more discomfort in imagining that than there was in being awake at 2 a.m., driving up
Mm-hmm.
to Mount Hood. Well, actually, it was more like midnight, driving up to Mount Hood and hiking from 2 a.m. until sunup and then coming back down through the sulfur
Yeah.
fields and everything. And now I didn't know about how I was going to feel when it was 2 a.m. and the wind was blowing sleety snow down the mountain into our face as we were hiking up. At the same time, I can attribute that hiking that mountain to trying to move away from discomfort.
Yeah, and I guess where I have an issue with that is, I was talking about this men's group, and I
Uh-huh.
think that was probably one of the things that I did disagree with.
Excellent. I really want to hear your thoughts on this because like I said, I was having trouble. Like it was one of those things where I thought maybe I should disagree with this, but I couldn't think of any counterexamples to it, at least in the time I was thinking about it. I could find a way to explain behavior through trying to leave discomfort.
Yeah, I guess a lot of my you could think of discomfort kind of as feedback or whatever, and we could go down that path in a minute, but
Mm-hmm.
basically, when you are trying to get away from pain, and that's a motivator, as soon as the pain stops, then your motivation is gone. And what the kind of motivation that will kind of see you through to the end of something is when you're chasing instead of running from. And another example is, you can spend or a way that it's been said or that I've heard, Craig Blanchett is the guy who told me this, and it's stuck with me for a long time. So let's say that you want to leave Portland, right?
Okay.
That's your only goal. You know that in Portland, there's just a lot of pain and there's a lot of bad. It's bad for you for whatever reason. And so you leave Portland. Do you have something you want? Well, maybe, maybe not. You don't know which direction to go. And so you just leave. You head off in a direction, any direction. Well, if you know you want to go to Boise because there are many fish and, they give you guns when you live over there and land is cheap and jobs are plentiful and, you can pan for gold if you want. Uh, then you're headed in a direction. So instead, so you get both. You get two things when you go somewhere that you want to. So you go to Boise and you have what you want. You have Boise and you don't have Portland, right? So if you frame your life that way, as opposed to I don't want to be in places like Portland, like you don't have any goal that you're going after. It's a
This is actually really fascinating because this dovetails nicely with the conversation I was having, another conversation I was totally unrelated that I was having with my wife last night, which is about why do people move to different places. And
mm-hmm,
in that conversation, we were talking about how if life is a trip, I've heard the metaphor used: logic is the car and emotion is gas.
okay,
So the car is the structure that takes you to places, but gas is what really moves you there. And I feel like there was a better analogy that more clearly described the point. But the essence of the point was that emotion is kind of what moves us to things, and
mm-hmm,
then reason is what kind of what frames the way our emotion moves. And sometimes, and I guess I was thinking last night that a lot of times we make what at base level is an emotional decision, and then we pack a bunch of reason on top of it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that fits pretty well together with something that I learned a little while back, which is under a brain scan, thoughts and emotions don't look any different. Like there's no difference in what they physically what's happening inside your brain as far as electro whatever. And I think a lot of times we think we're being super rational, but at a certain point there's kind of axioms that make up the character of, who you are, Kyle, and who somebody else is. And given the same situation, because of your kind of core beliefs, you're going to make a different decision than them and be able to rationalize it.
In a way that fits with my core identity.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's kind of two options on the table right now for me. I won't get into details, but somebody was suggesting like, well, what if this bad thing happens?
Right.
And one of my kind of I'm not quite sure when this kind of became a core belief of mine, but I think it is, and it's that I don't want to make decisions out of fear. I want to make them not for that reason. I don't mind if that's a perhaps a contributing factor, but I don't want to make a kind of life decision about being afraid of what might happen. It's kind of like the risk, not the risk, but the fear of missing out
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, your friends are going up to climb Mount Hood and
Right.
you wanted to sleep in your warm bed at a, normal time like 3 a.m. It's not like I necessarily think that's the best for everyone all the time, no matter what, but that's
Well, let me ask you this. Why did you make that decision to are you sure it was entirely a rational decision to not be motivated by fear?
no, no, I'm not sure that it was entirely rational.
Could there be any discomfort that you're trying to steer clear of?
No. I'm just kidding. No, it definitely could be.
But
And I think
you
what
see what I'm getting at there, and I don't think I think you're totally right that in our kind of rational the rational side of us, we should have goals that are moving us towards things rather than just being driven one way or the other by a fear and uncertainty. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I think maybe where the truth of what um, the psychological research that I always was citing, where the truth of that research comes in, is that if you strip everything away and go down to a really base level, our flesh desires to flee discomfort.
Is fleeing discomfort and chasing pleasure exactly the same thing in your mind?
Not exactly, and I would need to read the psychological research that I was citing to speak more accurately. But I mean, he seemed to be indicating that this wasn't his idea, that he was
Hmm.
just summarizing what he had found in the research on human psychology.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't like that.
Well, and I think you're onto something by not liking it, because in some ways you could argue that, and there's a reason I use the term flesh. Our flesh
Hmm.
seeks to flee from discomfort, because I think not all the time is it sinful to flee from discomfort, but there is a sense in which that is part of our broken nature as fallen creatures, that is our base motivation.
Yeah. Do you think Eve was choosing to flee discomfort when she had that first bite?
Yeah.
So then not fallen nature, just human nature. She wasn't fallen at that point, right?
Well, when I mean, it seems like we're getting into kind of a semantic question about when exactly did she fall.
That's when she sinned.
But Jesus says that if you look at a woman, you have already committed adultery in your heart.
Yeah, but the commandment wasn't to not look at the apples.
Right. But what did looking at the apple in the way she looked at the apple lead or fruit lead to?
I don't know. I really think that was temptation, and then when she made the decision to eat it, that was when and followed through on. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. We're getting into semantics, but yeah, I don't know. What if she had just plucked the fruit? Maybe she did pluck the fruit ahead of time, and then it sat there for a while. Did she sin before she ate it? I don't know. Yeah, I think you could frame to get back to our discussion at hand,
Right.
and not when the fall of man was.
What second?
So I think you could frame things in terms of always fleeing pain, but I think you could turn that around and say always seeking pleasure, right? Or you could.
And that's what, at least I'll made the point that the scientific or the psychological research doesn't bear that out. Like Freud made the point that you part of us pursues pleasure and part of us flees pain.
Hmm.
And I'll basically said, or I'll said that the research since then has, and possibly before then too, comes more on the side of supporting the conclusion that our basest instinct is to flee discomfort. And I think I'm curious what you think about this idea. we can still go towards desirable things, and
Hmm.
that doesn't mean our basest motivation isn't a isn't fleeing discomfort.
Sure. I mean, you keep. I was picking up on you were using the word basest, but I don't think that I always do what my lowest level of motivation is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we as Christians shouldn't always act on our lowest level of motivation.
Yeah. One might even think never. Well, maybe not never. I don't know. If you're hungry, you should probably eat at least at some point. The way that I am about to use the word ambivalent is not like hemming and hawing, but just of being of two minds about something. And
Maybe agnostic.
no, ambivalent means what is like that's what the Greek or Latin or whatever like bi is two and
Hmm.
valence is value. So there's two values, right? In any case, whatever. So being of two, I'll just say it different. When I see a donut, in my better moments, I'm of two minds about that. Like, do I want
Mm.
that? It's like, well, yeah, the sugar and the texture and everything, it tastes good, but I won't feel good about it later. There's this base instinct to not have to think about X, Y, or Z and then like have a little sugar rush and that's that, but then it's done and over with. And my kind of prefrontal cortex is thinking this doesn't get you towards your goals or what you actually want, and so maybe don't do that. And then if you're arguing in your mind, then you tend to lose those arguments depending on your habits and your motivation and your and prompts and other things. But if you kind of talk out loud like, hey, my flesh or part of me wants to have that donut, but I know that's not what's good for me long term. Like saying that in the moment out loud brings everything into a different part of your brain. You basically move it forward from the back part of your brain to the front part of your brain, and that's a way to kind of short circuit the the part of your brain that has more power, because that's another thing that I've learned, and is I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about that. And
Well, I thought it was interesting that you pointed out that the lower part of your brain has more power, because I think that jives with what the psychological research that I was citing
hmm,
says. The second thing is I'm as you were just describing that situation and putting up long-term thinking versus short-term thinking, I'm wondering if the research really focused on short-term thinking,
hmm,
because I could see short-term thinking being very heavily influenced by that base mentality to flee pain, but long-term thinking can be more informed about a desire to go towards something
yeah,
at its core.
hmm,
And that's essentially what I mean. I didn't use the example of speaking out loud like you did, um, at because that's one effective tool. The tool he brought up was saying, I'm going to wait 10 minutes, and at the end of 10 minutes, if I still want it, if I still want to check my phone, if I still want to eat the donut, I'll do it. And his point was that the majority of time you wait 10 minutes, and whatever was influencing you to take that distracting step is going to be past, and you're no longer going to be interested in doing that distracting behavior.
hmm.
So maybe it'd be a good time to shift the conversation towards more long-term versus short-term thinking.
Well, I do want to get to that because I think that's helpful. But yeah, you've listened to that podcast more recently than me, and I've somewhat been talking off the cuff. And I'm curious if there's anything else from the podcast. And if not, then we can just shift into long term versus short term thinking, which brings up to mind some Naval podcasts that we've
Yep,
talked about before and listened to.
pure gold.
Pure gold. Not quite. It's an audio file, but anyway, yeah. Was there anything else from the?
Yeah, I one of the things. So obviously, Isaac and his wife are parents. We're parents, and one of the things the podcast addressed was how to allow kids to interact with technology, and recognizing that books were technology at one point and considered a lot more dangerous when they first came out than they are now.
Mm,
And it's not so much, we shouldn't think so much in terms of like technology bad, old technology good. We should think in terms of what is this being used for and is it fit to the purpose? So that
mm,
was a helpful thought from the podcast. Another theme in the podcast was of putting responsibility for our actions on someone else, on some technology, on some corporation,
mm,
but really taking responsibility for ourselves. And I thought it was really some of the tools he mentioned in Chrome, from hiding the Facebook news feed to hiding the comments and everything, and other videos on YouTube.
mm-hmm,
I've put on my computer and really enjoyed how, instead of, I can go onto Facebook with the intent to either go on Marketplace or go to one of the forums that I'm a part of, and instead of my news feed, I just put a bunch of proverbs in there, and so just a proverb shows up in place of the news feed. I kind of get reminded of the proverb, and then go on to the sidebar to Marketplace or one of the
mm,
forums that I meant to go to Facebook for, instead of getting distracted by the whole news feed. So the tools he put in there were really helpful.
yeah,
And then the final thing I wanted to bring up really ties in nicely with long-term versus short-term thinking, and that is the whole idea that focus is not the opposite of distraction, and distraction is not the opposite of focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. And
yeah,
in order to be distracted from something, we have to be going towards something. And
mm-hmm,
if we don't know
mm-hmm.
what we're going towards, then we can't be distracted by definition, because we have no traction.
Yeah, I love that. That was particularly helpful when I was unemployed because I
Hmm.
had quite a bit of free time. And it was like, what do I actually want to get done while I have this time?
Right.
And, and I did find myself being distracted. One of the tools that I use to kind of empty out feelings or to process in a way that, so I'm not really quick rabbit trail. I think
Go for it.
part of the reason that we will do things in order to distract ourselves is because we said you're distracting yourself from an emotion, but what I found is that it's an unsettled emotion. You can have a difficult experience. Let's say that something happens to me and I'm embarrassed. I don't want to share it with anybody. And every time I think about it, I think about that embarrassment, or I think about that something happens where it's like you don't want to share with anybody. You don't want to think about it. That's something that's pretty liable to have you choose to do, video games, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, anything. I don't want to think about that one thing. I'm going to flee that.
For sure.
Now, if something normal happens that's upsetting, like I'm traveling and I had a layover and they didn't put me up in a hotel and it was totally the airline's fault, or they filled my seat for no reason and I was stuck in LA, and this happened and that happened, and it was frustrating, and I can share that with everybody. There's no real embarrassment, even though it's a frustrating thing. It's not really a it's not difficult in the same way. And so when I think about it, there's no kind of dissonance at all.
Your identity has been attacked.
My identity hasn't been attacked. It's not, yeah. So it's none of those things. And so one of a good way to let kind of steam out with things that don't embarrass you or don't attack you or don't chip away or don't change your identity. Let's say that an opposite example of that would be somebody does something and you respond really badly in a way that you would never want to admit to someone that you responded.
Right.
And then you can't share that with people, and then it creates that difficulty.
You don't want to share that with people.
Exactly.
You should, but
Right. And so when I was out of work, one of the things I was trying to distract myself from is that was somewhat of an identity thing. And what I should have done was spent a lot of time journaling and dealing with those things. That would have been a perfect use of journaling because you can talk and think through and even say things that are you're not sure if they're true or not, kind of test them out
Mm-hmm.
and nobody's going to judge you because there's nobody but you, and you can say, that didn't feel right. That's not actually how I'm feeling. This is what I'm actually feeling. Anyway, so instead, I distracted myself probably with being busy, or that first week I was off, I helped David build some stuff, which was, it wasn't bad, it was good, and we talked about it, but it's like there's not a whole, once you get let go, it's not, there just wasn't much to it, and so it was like there wasn't a whole lot to talk about there.
Right. You weren't necessarily building. I mean, you were building a friendship, but
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, he was off on spring break that week. He's a teacher, and so yeah, it was just. I mean, it was good for him. It was two springs in a row that I could help him with some big projects,
yeah.
which is kind of funny. Yeah, I think I got on the rabbit trail, and I don't remember 100% where the main path
Well, we were
was.
talking about traction versus distraction and how.
I think I did finish my thought then, in that it kind of towards the end, probably after listening to that podcast, or definitely after listening to that podcast, I kind of started setting myself a schedule for the week, and
Yeah, that was another cool thing. Have you? I haven't. Confession, I haven't done this yet, but I liked what he said about setting up your calendar before the week starts,
hmm
and potentially even going to your boss and saying, "Hey, this is what my calendar looks like. Is there anything else on here that you think I should be doing?
yeah,
Or I've got this spare time.
hmm
Are there things that you need that I should be filling it with?" And how, like, a manager is going to love that, because a lot of times they don't know what they would like to know what their people are working on, but they feel uncomfortable asking about that. And so it gives them both a good sense of what you're working on and a vested stake in what you're working on, because they told you spend your time doing this.
hmm
And then the concept that you can achieve success, you can feel that achievement of success more readily, because you aren't trying to check tasks off the list. You're simply putting 100% into whatever task you've scheduled for the time that you scheduled it.
I love the idea of that. That works really well for certain kinds of jobs and not others. Yeah, so with my job in retail now, I work for a retail company. I'm not in retail, I guess. Basically, at certain times of the day when things are really busy, like everybody's in retail for a little bit. Like I probably talk to, I don't know, 20 people a day or something on the phone, and it's questions like, what are your guys' hours? Can I talk to this person? Can I talk to this person? Or how much does it cost for my deck? And here are all the parts that I need. And it's like, all right, work through the system, or if it's going to be too big a project, I just send them to the sales guys. But the sales guys deal with the people calling in orders as well as people walking in the store. And there's rumors that one of the larger lumber yards in Vancouver, that's not like Home Depot or Lowe's, is going to not sell to the public anymore because of how constrained their prices are, or constrained their inventory is.
Right,
And so that means even though we were very busy, we are about to be much, much more busy.
right,
So every day, at least twice, there's 10 people in line, and we're a little store. Everybody's being helped, but we just don't have enough. So to have a schedule is like, there's a couple times that are particularly busy, but I wouldn't be able to say to my boss, here's my schedule for the week. I could say, here are 2 3-hour chunks that I'm going to spend working on things related to stuff, but I'm not, I don't know that I would be able to schedule more than 3 or 4 hours like that.
which is more than I do right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's more than I do as well.
Quick sidebar: are the people who call in and say these are all the parts for my deck? How much is it gonna cost? Are they people who need to walk through the phone, or are they people who would use, if there was a web application that did that for them, would they use that?
They would probably use that, but I don't know. With a few exceptions, I don't know that most of the people would know all the things they need. And so it wouldn't be particularly good service to them to have something where they could just buy exactly what they thought they needed, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we could probably have maybe 10 to 15 different customers who probably purchase most of our decking materials using a web application. And they do multiple orders a week for anywhere between like three and, they build 3 to 5 decks a week or something.
Mhm.
They've got a
But
bunch of
take
different.
someone like me, I might forget that I need so many footings per so many feet.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you had talked to me and said, okay, how big is the deck area? What are you planning on putting on it?
Mm-hmm.
You would need to ask me those questions.
How are you fastening it? Do you, here's how many you need for that. And then the other thing is like, so Trex decking right now, there's several different colors and there's two different types, but colors and types that they're out of until the end of June.
Right.
And it's like you place an order for a particular color and you're planning on using a particular type of clipping that you need grooved decking for. And it's like, well, you can have 5 sticks of that or 5 pieces, and the other 15 that you need will be here, July 1st. It's like, well, you would actually probably rather that you know that before you place your order and maybe choose a different color or get it all at once at July 1st, and then you have some time to build all the framing.
I mean, if you have a database with that information in it, that sounds exactly like what you'd want to be done over computer.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know inventory until I call our suppliers. So I call 4 or 5 suppliers 4 or 5 times a day each,
Okay.
every single day. And I'm doing that to begin with to kind of establish some rapport, or knowing the couple different salespeople who I would actually be working with. But soon I'll be emailing most of those orders in because it's much more efficient.
Right.
And I don't almost all the stuff that I order comes next day. They're close, or that we just do enough business with them that they just deliver as often as we want.
They have a truck that just comes to your place every day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've kind of gotten off the track a little bit there.
No, no, no. This is right where we want to be, Kyle.
But yeah, getting back towards long-term versus short-term thinking and
Hmm.
traction versus distraction. You mentioned that you wanted to get there eventually. So is there anything else you'd like to talk about before
Now is the time.
now is the
No,
time?
this is good. This is perfect. As far as goals go and long-term thinking, you and I talk a lot about, and I think what makes us have good conversations and the kind of friendship that we have is that we aren't particularly just interested in, if your environment is what shapes you, then we're interested in shaping our environment to have that kind of reflect back into the life that we want, as opposed to just letting life happen to us as best we can. Although,
Right.
I think you and I maybe both fall short of where we would like to be,
For sure.
and in certain ways. In other ways, we're probably very successful. But I guess I don't know. Do you ever have teachers tell you that they saw a lot of potential in you,
Yeah,
or adults and stuff? It's like it was kind, but also backhanded is the wrong word, but it's like almost like you could be so much more, or
huh. I guess maybe no one ever said it in quite those words because I can see how that could be construed that way. It was more, here's an opportunity I think you would really like or really benefit from.
yeah.
That was
So
more how it was related to me.
yeah. So when I was younger, I was smart but lazy.
Your words or teacher's words?
My words. I
Okay.
don't know that anybody ever said I was smart and lazy, but whenever I applied myself to classes, I did pretty well. And often, without trying too hard, I would get, B's. And often I didn't even try that hard, especially in younger grades. That didn't serve me particularly well as an adult. I think there's a lot of value to doing, not having work be kind of below you, or you feel that it's basically prideful is what it is. But I would have teachers tell me like, oh, there's so much, parent-teacher conference, it's like Daniel's enjoyable to have in classes. He has a lot of potential, but I know he's not doing as well as he could, basically. And I think as I look at myself now from that kind of parent-teacher conference, kind of like, well, how am I doing? It's like, well, I'm doing well in these areas, but I could do a lot better in these areas. And it's always
Hmm.
kind of that like he's doing okay, but if he really applied himself, then, it could be so much more. Maybe I'm hard on myself, I don't know, but I think if you
Well, I've been having the same thoughts, which
yeah.
is part of where this discussion comes up because thinking through, okay, traction, what am I going towards? Long term thinking, like you were kind of mentioning the positive feedback loop of creating an environment where we're surrounded by people who are not just kind of living the life they've always lived, but really trying to push forward and be those four Marines up on the hill on Iwo Jima, putting the American flag in the ground at the top of the hill,
Mm,
after fighting their way from the beach inland,
yeah.
and yeah, wanting to surround ourselves with people like that and wanting to contribute to a culture like that. I think that's part of what led to some of my questions recently about, okay, am I am I growing at my in my current job? How can I be growing more in my current job? Can I grow as fast as I want to in my current job? And am I growing towards something I want to grow towards? And those are questions I'm still wrestling through. I think I've got some answers on the side of, here are things I can do to grow faster in my current role, and I'm trying to take ownership of those activities while continuing to process through some of the maybe longer term questions.
Hmm. Yeah. What is there ways that you have kind of worked through those, or is it just kind of
Worked through what?
the question you just mentioned a handful of different questions,
Right. Yeah.
So is there ways that you've worked through those? Do you think as you're walking home, do you talk to your wife about it?
Those two, talk to other people about it. I've done a little bit of journal type stuff where I've like sketched out sort of, this is what the future could look like. These are what I like about that. These are things I don't like about it. So those are some of the things I've done,
Mm,
having conversations like this, reading books, or talking to people about uh, their their career, I guess, and their engagement with this life that we all have
mm-hmm.
is helpful for kind of seeing, what do I react, what do I like about that life, what aspects of their life do I go, I wouldn't want that in my own life, why or why not.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I think the probably two tools of those that you've kind of mentioned, the journaling and even just starting out just writing like here's, starting out kind of surface level and then continue to write through it and at a certain point you run out of things to say and you get into
Right.
kind of a deeper part of your brain. One thing that's kind of interesting is that, it's fairly easy to stay surface level with someone if you want to.
Hmm.
Um, and in certain situations, even if you don't want to. But when you're writing and you're by yourself, it's harder to maintain that.
Well, it feels like a waste of time.
Sure, it definitely, yeah, and maybe at some level it is a waste of time, but it's also like you you can't like eventually you just I don't know, it's like gravity or something. You just start to write things that are more meaningful and especially if you go back and read what you've written because we reveal things about ourselves that we don't intend to all the time. Like, yeah, someone today at work was super upset and, you know, I asked him about it later and he told me a completely unrelated story and then just paused and I didn't really respond. I didn't really say anything after he finished his story.
You can call them out on it.
Well, there was nothing to call him out on. he was just like, I have no idea why I told you that story.
Oh,
And it was like, he got started on it, and then he just kind of continued on. And I was asking, I basically mentioned that I saw that he'd been, so it was almost 5 p.m. when I brought that up, and
right.
his upsetness was kind of like right when I walked in the door in the morning. And so it'd been, 9 hours basically.
Uh-huh.
But I think something that's kind of scary, or it's just something I'm aware of, I guess, is that this will be episode 17 or 16 if I just decide to publish this one, and not the last one.
Well, the last one was kind of scattered.
It was pretty scattered. Anyway,
You could call it episode 2.2.
well,
Just bury it back there.
yeah, just bury it. I don't think I could do that. Just change the publish date to something previous. Anyway, just you know, you interrupted me, Kyle, and now I didn't.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm not upset. So I'm just aware that as I'm talking, I'm revealing more about myself than I probably intend.
I've actually thought about that on some of the podcast episodes ago. Like, ooh, that's out in the public now.
Yeah,
Honesty's good, though.
it is. It is. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to chat about tonight? Anything else related to the long-term goals?
I think this would be kind of a cool conversation for the next time. Is entrepreneurship the best way to really see your potential?
Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for the conversation.
Yeah.
I enjoy having these.
Yeah, always. Hey guys, it's Daniel once again. Just want to say thanks for listening to the episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Kyle, Rachel, Molly, Leland, Cora, Littlest Munchkin. Come back soon.